This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. And now, Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 8, Madame Hyla was a bullfrog. I woke, chilled to the bone, sometime in the night to the smell of snuffed candle smoke, with the terrible feeling that I was being watched. Glenn was asleep next to me, spooning me to keep warm. We had moved our blankets to the back of the tent as far away from the icy wind as possible. It was dark. Dark? It wasn't supposed to be dark. I wished fervently for the lights to come back on. They had never gone out before. The candles flickered and sputtered, but finally did cast a faint glow within the canvas walls. The feeling of evil was so thick in the air that I gagged. A creature stood in the doorway, the wind whipping around it. The thing was black, spiky and fetid with hungry eyes. I couldn't see much more in the dimness, but then lightning struck and illuminated it for an instant, horrifyingly clear. It had stopped advancing, pushed back by the light of the candles. The image remained burned onto my retinas, and I was frozen with fear. Once my vision cleared, I saw it limp away. There were a few others waiting outside, and they melted into the storm. I looked over at Glenn, still sleeping peacefully. Perhaps I had only imagined it, the stress of the past hours playing tricks on me. Huddling back into his warmth, I wondered if what I'd seen had been real. I drifted back to sleep, but lightly this time, afraid of another apparition. Sometime later I woke again with that same feeling of being watched. Something was sitting just inside the doorway, staring at me with large yellow eyes. This time I knew it was real. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shook Glenn awake, and he sensed the danger immediately. He jumped up from the blankets with his sword in hand, facing the creature. We had decided to sleep in minimal clothing to utilize more body heat, and he faced our intruder with only thin undershorts between him and the below-freezing temperatures. I shivered in my shift, clutching the blankets as if they could shield me from harm. "Who are you?" he demanded, taking a step toward the intruder. "Who are you?" the creature asked with a raspy voice. "This is my home. You are trespassing here." "So," it crawled forward a pace, "who are you?" "I am Glenn Ellenbill. This is Alana. We are friends of Ambius, who sought shelter from the storm. Who are you?" He kept his sword leveled against the cave's owner. "What are you doing here?" it asked again. "I answered your question. Now please answer mine. I asked, sir, who are you?" Glenn repeated. The creature laughed in the oddest way. It was an inward laugh, like the sound of a bullfrog. A wide mouth split open and a shiny pink tongue rolled out of its head as the creature clutched its middle and guffawed. "I am not a sir," it said, getting under control at last. "Though I see that you are." It laughed again, but less animatedly. I giggled nervously in spite of myself. He must be freezing standing half naked in the cold. I'd pulled my blankets tighter around me. I wanted to hand him some covers, but didn't want to distract his attention from our amphibious-looking guest. "I am Madame Hyla," she said, and her yellow eyes blinked. "What are you doing here?" I answered for him. "We're traveling and thought we could ride out the storm in here. Are you planning to hurt us?" She studied us, large yellow eyes sliding back and forth between us. Then shook her fat head and replied, "No, child. Your elf can return to your warmth." Glenn nodded sharply in thanks to Madame Hyla and dove into the covers, seized by a fit of shivers. I held him close, even though it felt like hugging an ice sculpture, willing my heat to travel into him. His chills lessened after a moment, and Madame Hyla remained immobile by the door. He still had his sword ready, in case of betrayal. The lights in the tent flared to full brightness finally, and she stepped into the glow. She looked like a frog. She had a shiny round face, a wide mouth with a few small teeth, and a rotund body. Her coloring was frog-like as well, being slightly green with yellow eyes. What hair she had on her head was gathered into a neat topknot the color of algae. Her dress was minimal, only a roughly cut burlap sack. "Are you cold, Madam Hyla? Can I get you a blanket?" I asked. She shook her head slowly and lowered herself into a squat.
"No, I am not cold, thank you."
"Thank you for not hurting us," I said. "We didn't mean to trespass." She nodded and swayed from side to side. Glenn had finally warmed enough to stop his teeth from chattering. I wished some hot tea for us and whatever Madam Hyla might like to be served. Our tea appeared, and a plate of almond and cockroach cookies materialized before our host. Her eyes grew wide and a smile spread across her whole face.
"My favorite!"
She shoved one into her mouth.
"Thank you,"
she muttered with her mouth full. "You're welcome," I said, and sipped my tea. I wished for our robes, and they appeared, thickly lined with wool now, and we slipped them on quickly.
"You have a nice-looking elf-man there, child,"
Madam Hyla said to me, winking as Glenn stood to dress. "Thanks. Not to be rude, but is there anything you wanted?" "It's just that we have a long way yet to go, and we need our rest."
"Oh, rest," she said, smirking. "Well, yes, I did have a reason for disturbing you, other than your trespassing."
She chewed for a while longer, burping frequently. I didn't feel like I should rush her. When she finished eating, she said,
"Something is hunting you."
Glenn and I both gaped at her, instantly alert, blood turning to water in our veins. "Have you seen it?" he asked.
"Yes," she said, surprised at the question. "How else would I know about it? I've had more than one trespasser tonight."
I felt physically ill. "They were here, in your cave?" I asked. So, it hadn't been my imagination.
"They were. I was preparing dinner when it burst into my kitchen. I threw the boiling kettle at it and wounded it badly," she said with pride. "It limped out past your tent and joined the others on the ledge, slinking off into the night."
"Do you have any idea what it was?" I asked. She seemed astounded by this question as well.
"Of course. It was a fairy."
I was confused. My idea of a fairy was a cute little thing with glittery skin and butterfly wings, not dangerous at all. Glenn, however, swallowed loudly. I could see that he was shaken, and I began to worry. "Did it want something from you?" Glenn asked. She looked at him with approbation.
"It wanted me to give you to them."
"Why didn't you?" I asked. "Not that I'm complaining," I added quickly.
"They are creatures of intense evil. I couldn't have that kind of thing in my home. I'm not so inexperienced a host as to neglect the laws of hospitality. You fled to my cave for sanctuary. You were under my protection. That is why they asked my permission instead of just killing you in your sleep. Let it not be said that Madam Hyla let a fairy draw blood in her halls." She spat onto the stone floor.
"Thank you again." I felt the blood drain from my face, realizing we'd been one stranger's decision away from doom. She smiled and slowly ambled over to our pallet of blankets. Her movements were so sluggish, it occurred to me that she was cold-blooded. When she came within arm's length, she picked up my hand and looked at my palm. Her tongue flicked out a few times, like a snake tasting the air, but it was smooth, not bifurcated. Her big yellow eyes met mine.
"Rock is a great friend of my family. What hunts you will not let you reach him unless you have help. Do you have transportation?"
"No, we've been on the lookout for horses, but haven't found any," I replied.
"Horses will do you no good in the southern lands. The ground is hot and the flames startle them. It is nearly morning. You should leave as soon as it's light. Make haste, and I will arrange your transportation. It will come from the sky. I can't make any promises, but I will try. I know what errand you bear, and I stand with you against the warlord. If I can help, I will."
She let my hand drop and began backing away slowly. "Thank you, ma'am," Glenn said, smiling charmingly at her. The apples of her cheeks shifted from pale green to rosy lavender. She was blushing.
"It's nothing. Now, you've got a few hours until dawn. Get some sleep."
Winking at us and moving laboriously away, she left us in peace in the increasingly bright light of the tent. Glenn sighed and reached out for me to lay down with him. I tucked myself neatly into the angles of his body. He kissed the tip of my nose, then my forehead, and buried his face in my hair. "I know it's not yet morning." but will you answer me now?" I had declined to answer his proposal right away. I'd given back the box and fallen asleep considering it. Marriage was a big commitment, not at all something I'd allowed myself to consider. Did I even have a right to bind myself to him, knowing that my fate was anything but certain? The cold wind had dictated the need for skin-to-skin contact beneath the covers just to retain enough heat to keep us alive. It had felt right. It was like we were bound already, and that terrified me. He had been a perfect gentleman, giving me mental space to think, if not physical distance, and I had fallen asleep, debating with myself. "Are you sure? Are you really sure you want to be with me forever? I'm a mess." "More certain than I've ever been about anything, believe me." "But darling, you don't really know me. I don't even know me. What if it turns out that I'm an awful person? What if I was married in my world?" I felt his body stiffen. "Do you think that's possible?" "No, I don't know who I am, but I know I have never been loved. This is all new to me, unfamiliar, scary." "People change, Alana. I've changed a great deal in the past few ages. If you were a bad person before, I believe you are no longer. I'm willing to risk it." "Okay, but I'm from another planet, another species. Is it even allowed?" "Actually, I asked Ambius that question before we left. He said that your kind have come here many times before, and some have bound themselves to the people of our world. It isn't an issue." "What's there to love about me, Glenn? I'm empty. I'm clueless. When you found me, I was helpless and hideous. Now I'm dragging you all over the world on this dangerous quest. Why do you even love me?" I held my breath, waiting for the answer. My limbs began to tremble and tears welled. Maybe he couldn't answer and he'd made a mistake. Maybe he would revoke his proposal. I felt panic claw its way up my throat at the thought. "Alana, when I found you, half dead in the leaves, you allowed me to help you, even though you had been attacked. It was clear that men had abused you, and yet you came with me. You chose to trust me. When Gable was cruel to me, you stood up against him, even though we were still practically strangers. When he wanted to claim you, to inflame your heart like he had Lillian's, you called out for me instead. You have endured immense, unspeakable pain, and yet you are kind. And, you may not know this, but your face betrays everything you think and feel. You're honest, hopeful, beautiful." He ran the tip of his finger over the thick scar on my neck, the ugliest part of me. My breath caught. "And even if you say no, and deny the covenant of bonding I offer, I will protect you with my life. I will not abandon you. I will love you, even if you don't love me. But your face tells me you love me every time I smile at you." He smiled. I looked into his eyes, focusing on the little gold flecks. He thought I was beautiful. He could touch my scars without revulsion. He'd seen through me from the beginning. Glenn loved me. I let the truth of it settle in my soul. I loved him too. What did I have to lose? "Yes, Glenn, I'll be bound to you." His smile brightened the tent much more than the candles could. He snatched the box from his pile of clothing and opened it, revealing a ring. He slid it onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. The ring was white gold wire laced in a sort of Celtic-style knot. It held up the most beautiful emerald I'd ever seen. At least, I thought it was an emerald, until the light caught it and it cast rainbows on every surface. I beamed at him, holding his hands to my heart. My pleasure waned as a thought occurred to me. This wasn't Lillian's ring, was it? I didn't want to be wearing his dead cheating wife's ring. "No," he said firmly. "Oh, good," I sighed. A note floated down onto our heads. Glenn read it, laughed, and handed it to me. It read, "By the power vested in the Watcher Ambius by the Creator, via his amazingly efficient, thoughtful, and irreplaceable tent, I now pronounce you bound. The covenant is confirmed. Congratulations." A tiny white cake made of sweetened cashew cream, dates, and cherries appeared beside us, with 2 figures on top that resembled us in striking detail. I shoved a large chunk into his mouth. He returned the gesture, laughing. He took my hands in his and looked at me with such feeling my breath caught. And when he kissed me this time, he didn't fling me away. We woke to the first rays of dawn's light brightening the mouth of the cave. I used my left hand to move hair from my face and noticed the ring. It sparkled, casting rainbows on the canvas walls. I rolled over and looked at my new husband. He kissed my forehead and rose to get dressed, a fresh stack of clothes provided by the tent. I blushed, recalling scenes from that night and the bonding. He noticed and chuckled, a sly grin of masculine satisfaction on his lips. I guess it was true that my face showed everything I thought or felt. After fastening his belt, he tossed me my clothes. As much as I'd like to give you something more to blush about, we must leave. I dressed with a feeling of shyness I hadn't expected. The tent had graciously provided thick, wool-lined coats over thick flannel tunics, fleece scarves and pants, and waterproof boots and gloves. The storm had passed, but left several inches of sleet, hail, and snow to contend with, making the trip down the barren shale mountain even more difficult than usual. Breath misted out through my scarf as I gasped with the effort of keeping upright on the extreme downward slope. The morningberry wine had done its job on my leg. I was completely healed. That was a good thing, too. We were being hunted, had almost been captured last night, and it fueled us. It pushed us forward at a rate nearly too swift for my legs to accommodate. "What are fairies exactly?" I asked when Glenn picked me up and helped me over a steep ledge. He seemed surprised that I didn't know, but answered kindly, taking my hand and helping me down the mountain. "They are shadows of the dwarves that served the warlord," he said. "They are ugly, stringy creatures with claws, fangs, and no fear of death. They don't die unless killed outright, never passing on from sickness or old age. They have no peace, no purpose, except to do what the warlord commands." "So they're a sort of undead horde of evil sent to kill us. Great. I always thought fairies were these cute little people with wings and sparkles and a love of nature." "You're thinking of pixies," he said. "Very different beings. We don't have any pixies. They're mostly in the West. All the lands have sprites, though." "What are sprites?" "They are incredible people. They embody the elemental character of their land. The eastern lands have wind sprites that live in the breezes and tickle your face. They play tricks when the wind grows stronger, howling from the trees. I had the incredible fortune to serve under one in my regiment. He would stir up the dust around the enemy so they couldn't see us, and forced powerful winds at them when they advanced. He was very helpful." I remembered something from my first day in this new, dangerous world and said, "When I was dying in the leaves, something carried me to you. I couldn't have gotten that far from the dead spring in the state I was in. A swirling wind carried me as I slept." "You think that was a wind sprite?" "Yes, it must have been. I hope I get to think it one day. Why do you think it brought you to me?" "Because you found me. I'm glad you did." "I'm glad, too." I reached around and squeezed his bum. He yelped, releasing the hand that held mine and jumping back. I laughed. He smiled with a scolding gesture and nudged me onward. Soon we reached the foot of the mountain, and the walking became easier now that the ground was finally leveling back out. The landscape slowly altered from the mountains to rocky moorland. The wind slapped with stinging gusts and pushed against us as we walked. I hadn't had any memory dreams recently, and didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. It had been about 3 weeks by my time since I'd arrived in this world, and I still knew almost nothing. I had a name, though, and a partner to love and protect me. No sense living in the past. Everything I needed to know I would in time discover. For now, I held tightly to Glenn's hand and continued through the wilderness to seek my fate in the land of fire. A blood-curdling noise pierced our eardrums and echoed off the mountainsides we'd just conquered, stopping us in our tracks. A new, louder shriek answered nearer to us, and my heart went cold. Turning to look, we saw shadows moving toward us at incredible speed. I felt a jolt of electricity flow up my spine. "Run!" Glenn shouted. He clutched my hand and pulled me forward. His stride was a lot longer than mine, so I could barely keep up, but I pushed myself beyond the limits of lung capacity or muscle fatigue. We ran. The landscape was littered with boulders and other stones. I had to lift my knees high to avoid tripping over them and dragging us both down to our deaths. The effort was draining me quickly. Glenn had a runner's body, muscular, lean, and fast. I was no athlete, and I chugged and puffed like an old-timey train running out of steam. They were close behind us now. The sun had hidden behind a thick bank of clouds. The resultant dim gave boldness to the fairies that usually remained in darkness. We must be getting close to the southern lands, I thought. They had been growing more reckless the further we traveled. My lungs were burning from bitter cold and exercise. I could feel twitching begin in my quad muscles, and my calves were tight and clenching. Glenn seemed unfazed by the pace. He was barely breathing heavily. I gasped and sputtered, a stitch in my side making me want to stop and let him kill me. Glenn pulled me onward, dragging me up when I stumbled, and whispering hasty encouragements. Our attackers were only 20 yards behind us when a large shadow swept across the earth in our path. I looked up to see an enormous dragon flapping its wings as it came in for a landing. It struck the earth, causing a minor earthquake, and faced the fairies. We ducked under it as it landed and felt the shockwave of its breath ripple over our backsides as it blasted our pursuers with fire. They shrieked terribly, and Glenn slowed. We both looked back to see what had happened. There were 5 twisted figures on fire, writhing and making such an almighty racket that I put my hands over my ears. Glenn had hold of my arm and was pulling me back from the scene. Through the flames, I saw my hunters for the first time. Even on fire, they were moving toward us, jaggedly stomping and dragging themselves onward with hatred in their hollow eyes. They were just as Glenn had described, shadowy figures, blurry along the edges as if drawn heavily in pencil, but then erased. Red fangs dripped with hateful curses as they focused on me. They drew together, advancing even while engulfed by flames. Sharp talons glinted in the hazy sun of winter. Still, they trudged toward me, willing themselves on with frenzied purpose. The shadows began to fade slowly, becoming more transparent. They were dying. We backed away slowly, serenaded by their death cries. The dragon stepped sideways and launched them into the air with a powerful swing of his battle-ram tail. The shrieking balls of flame landed so far away from us that they looked like tiny pinpricks of orange against the gray shale of the mountains. The dragon turned to us, and we froze. It was large, red, and spiked. Its eyes were orange, its teeth gleaming white, fang-like, and enormous. It studied us. A big scaly foot stepped heavily forward and lowered its body into a courtly bow. "Well met, enemies of the warlord," he said. His voice was crackling and hungry like the roar of a great bonfire. "I am Blaze, captain of the armies of the southern lands, advisor to Rock, and friend of Madame Hyla, who sent for me. I'm at your service." Glenn stepped toward him and bowed. "I am Glenn Ellenbill. This is my wife, Alana Ellenbill." I felt a flutter in my tummy hearing the new title spoken for the first time. I finally had a name that meant something to me. "Thank you for saving us," he added. "Yes, thanks." Blaze smiled, and every one of his teeth showed. They were fierce and vicious, made for tearing flesh and smashing bones. His wings flapped, and I noticed they were oddly delicate, like bats' wings. "I am bid by Rock to escort you to his kingdom. Please climb onto my back, and we will leave at once." I looked past the dragon to see 2 more shadows moving toward us slowly. One had an injured leg. Maybe that was the one Madame Hyla had disfigured. The memory of our froggy helper made me send a silent word of thanks to her. Glenn lifted me onto the back of our new ally, and I pulled him up behind me. His arms came around my waist protectively, and his legs tucked themselves into the joint of the wings, gripping tightly as if riding a horse. "Hold tight," Blaze warned, and lifted off the ground with a powerful whoosh. We climbed higher and higher into the sky, so high that the shadows disappeared and the entire landscape came into view. The boulder-scattered moors fell away and seemed to melt into a rocky wasteland. Nothing grew on the large slabs of stone below. We saw vents of heated gas and spouts of flame geyser upward in 1,000 different spots. An enormous volcanic mountain loomed in the distance, spewing smoke and ash into the air and rumbling. That appeared to be our destination. I leaned back into Glenn's arms, glad not to be running anymore. Forget horses. Dragons were the way to go. I will take you to the Hall of Meeting. Rock will speak with you there. Do not set foot anywhere else, or you will perish in flame, Blaze informed us upon beginning his descent. I could see a large palace set in the side of an enormous volcano. Rivers of lava flowed on each side, with waves of heat radiating upward like summertime on blacktop. A large expanse of black stone, like polished obsidian, rushed up at us. It was bordered by gigantic columns of carved tiger's eye, supporting nothing but the burnt sienna sky. Blaze landed smoothly on the platform, and we dismounted. The great rock will be with you shortly. Prepare yourselves to meet him, Blaze said with another dragon bow, and flew away in circles over the palace. I watched him go, feeling the heat of the atmosphere smother my face. What do you think he'll be like? The Watcher? Who knows? I've never met him. Glenn shrugged off his coat and scarf and helped me do the same. I felt as if I was going to be sick. We'd gone from below freezing winds to the breath of Hades. My head felt light and fuzzy. I needed water. Pulling out my small flask, I popped the cork and tipped it to my lips. But nothing came out. It had evaporated, boiled away. Sighing, I sat down on the hot stone, feeling like I was being baked in a giant oven. We were here, my first task in the quest I hadn't quite committed to. I was here only for lack of anything better to do, and to stay with Glenn. Sure, I wanted to help, but this was getting dangerous. We could have been killed last night if we'd chosen an unoccupied cave, or the cave of an enemy. I shivered despite the clawing heat. I had no idea what to do or say. I'd looked my attackers in the face, and they were horrible. Such unadulterated evil in their blurred, shadowy faces. Everyone here seemed to have a purpose, a commitment to a cause. I was still a leaf on the wind, my edges singeing now in the land of fire. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.